Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're gonna be looking at A Scanner Darkly,
Oh, yeah.
which is a film based on a Philip K. Dick novel, and I think
Yeah.
this one is right up your alley. I know you're a fan of stuff that's thought provoking and kind of mind bendy.
Yeah,
So this one definitely fits the bill.
for sure.
So A Scanner Darkly is set in this dystopian future, and it follows this undercover cop named Bob Arctor,
Okay.
and Arctor's whole mission is to try to bring down this dangerous drug called Substance D.
Right.
But here's the catch. He's also struggling with his own addiction to the drug.
Wow.
So you can already see where the conflict is going to come from.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a great premise.
Yeah, so basically as his addiction gets worse, his sense of self starts to unravel, and he's literally losing himself in this investigation.
That's so interesting.
So we're going to be exploring, some big themes here, like the nature of identity, the destructive power of addiction, and also the chilling consequences of living in a surveillance state.
Yeah, because I remember the surveillance is everywhere in that movie. It's like a character itself.
No,
Almost.
it's like Big Brother is always watching.
Exactly.
So, and then we have Substance D itself, which is not your average street drug.
Yeah.
It causes all these crazy hallucinations, memory loss, and even a really messed up form of split brain syndrome.
Oh, wow. I don't even know. How is that even possible?
I know, it's pretty freaky. And we'll talk about the science behind it, or at least the ideas behind it. And
Okay.
so we'll definitely be diving into all that stuff, and we'll also be discussing the scramble suit, which I'm sure you remember.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a iconic visual from the film.
Yeah, it's so cool.
But it's not just a cool visual. It's super symbolic.
Okay.
It represents Arctor's fractured identity and how he's literally coming apart at the seams.
Yeah. So it's not just a cool gadget. It's it really means something.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there's this whole other layer to the story with Donna Hawthorne, who's sort of Arctor's love interest.
Okay.
But of course, nothing is as it seems.
Oh, I'm sure.
So we'll unpack who Donna really is and the role that she plays in Arctor's ultimate downfall, and the film's whole message about manipulation and betrayal.
So many twists and turns.
Oh yeah, you're gonna be like, whoa.
Okay, can't wait.
And then finally we have to talk about the surveillance state, which is a huge part of this film. And Philip K. Dick's own paranoia about government monitoring really fueled this aspect of the story.
Right.
And it's crazy how relevant that is today.
Yeah.
With all the stuff about data collection and privacy and all that.
It's true. It's we're living in that world now almost.
I know, it's kind of creepy.
It is.
So yeah, we're gonna be unpacking all of that and more as we take this deep dive into A Scanner Darkly.
I'm so excited.
Okay, so let's start by going back to Philip K. Dick, the man behind the masterpiece.
Yeah.
What I find really interesting is how much of this story is rooted in his own life.
Yeah, I read that too. He had a pretty wild life.
He wasn't just some sci-fi writer with a crazy imagination. He lived through some really intense stuff that directly influenced the film.
So it's semi-autobiographical in a way.
Kind of, yeah.
Wow.
The 1970s were a super tumultuous time for him. His marriage fell apart, and he started using a lot of drugs, particularly amphetamines.
Oh, wow.
And he even experienced writer's block, which is mirrored in Arctor's struggle with Substance D. It's this feeling of being mentally paralyzed. You just can't create or even function properly.
I can imagine that's got to be terrifying for a writer.
Totally. And then on top of all that, he had this real-life experience with a burglary.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that.
Yeah, and it's straight out of the film.
Mm.
It really shows how those anxieties about security and paranoia, about being watched, just seeped into his writing.
Right, all that fear is just pouring out onto the page.
Exactly. And then there's his time in the Escalade recovery program, which also made it into the film. This is where he encountered people battling addiction and witnessed the darker side of rehab centers.
So that's where the inspiration for New Path came from.
Right. It's presented as this benevolent organization, but underneath there's this creepy undercurrent of manipulation and control.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if true freedom is even possible in a world where help and control are so intertwined.
That's such a good point. It's like a catch-22.
Yeah.
You need help, but then you're also giving up some of your freedom in the process.
Right.
And that's one of the big questions that the film is grappling with, It's this exploration of the limits of individual agency and the price we pay for seeking solace in external systems, whether it's through drugs or institutions.
Yeah, it's a commentary on society as a whole almost.
Totally. So, okay, we've established that Philip K. Dick's life was basically a blueprint for the film's dark and twisted world.
Yeah.
But let's get into the nitty-gritty of Substance D itself. What exactly is this drug, and how does it affect the characters so profoundly?
Yeah, like what is it about this drug that makes it so different from other drugs?
All right, so substance D is interesting because it's not really meant to represent just one specific drug.
Yeah.
It's more like a metaphor for addiction itself, like any substance that promises escape or euphoria,
Mm.
but ultimately leads to destruction and despair.
I see. So it's like a stand-in for any kind of addiction, whether it's to heroin or cocaine or
Yeah.
even something like gambling.
Exactly. And it's not just physical addiction either.
Oh, right.
It's the psychological and emotional aspects too.
Yeah.
The way addiction can like warp your perception, your identity, your whole sense of self.
Yeah, like it changes who you are as a person.
Right. And one of the ways it does that is by causing this heightened form of split brain syndrome. Have you ever heard of that?
I think so. Isn't that when like the two halves of your brain aren't communicating properly?
Yeah, exactly. It's a real neurological condition, and it can lead to like confusion, conflicting desires, and even the feeling that you're not in control of your own actions.
That sounds really scary.
It is.
Yeah.
And substance D basically takes this real condition and like cranks it up to 11.
Oh,
So the characters are like even more fragmented and detached from themselves.
I see. So it's like their brains are literally splitting apart.
Yeah. And the film visualizes this in some really disturbing ways. For example, there's Charles Freck, one of the addicts that Arctor encounters. He's constantly trying to wash away these imaginary bugs that he thinks are crawling all over him.
Oh God, that scene is so creepy. It's like you can feel his paranoia.
Right. And it's such a vivid portrayal of how substance D distorts perception and creates this terrifying sense of like delusion.
And then there's Ernie Luckman, who's like the opposite of Freck. He's all manic and paranoid.
Oh, yeah. He's a total mess.
Yeah.
He's always suspicious of everyone convinced they're plotting against him.
Oh,
It's like his addiction has amplified all his insecurities and fears.
right. Like it's taken everything that was already there and just blown it up.
Exactly. And that's the insidious thing about substance D. It doesn't just create physical dependence. It preys on your weaknesses, your vulnerabilities, your deepest fears, and twists them into these grotesque manifestations that control you.
So it's like the drug is a parasite feeding off your anxieties and ultimately destroying you from the inside out.
That's a great way to put it. And the film doesn't shy away from showing the devastating consequences of this parasitic relationship.
Mm.
We see characters spiraling into madness, losing their grip on reality, and ultimately suffering these really tragic fates.
So it's a pretty bleak outlook on addiction.
It is, but even though it's bleak, there's also this strange sense of empathy and humanity that shines through. It's not just a preachy, drugs are bad message. It's more like a nuanced exploration of the human desire for happiness, even if it's fleeting and self-destructive.
Yeah, I can see that. Like it acknowledges that there's a reason why people turn to drugs in the first place.
Right, it's often a desperate attempt to escape pain or to find some kind of joy in a world that feels overwhelming and oppressive.
That's really insightful.
So it's almost like the film is saying that addiction is not just a personal failing, but a symptom of a larger societal illness. Like a reflection of our collective longing for connection and meaning.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. It's like addiction is a symptom of a deeper problem.
Exactly.
Mm.
And that's one of the things that makes A Scanner Darkly such a powerful and enduring film.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the choices we make, even when those choices lead us down dark and dangerous paths.
Yeah, it's definitely not a feel-good movie, but it makes you think.
Okay, so we've talked about Philip K. Dick's influence the effects of substance D.
Yeah.
But let's move on to that iconic scramble suit. It's one of the most visually striking elements of the film, but it's also deeply symbolic. What do you think it represents?
Well, it's literally a device that constantly shifts the wearer's appearance, making them unrecognizable. So it's like the perfect visual metaphor for the film's theme of fragmented identity.
Right, like Arctor is literally wearing his shattered self on his sleeve, or rather, all over his body.
Exactly, and the fact that even his superiors can't recognize him when he's wearing the suit adds another layer to that idea of lost identity.
Yeah, it suggests that even the people who are supposed to know him best can't see through the facade.
It's like the suit is a symbol for all the masks we wear in different social situations, the way we present different versions of ourselves to the world. But for Arctor, the lines between those versions start to blur, and he loses sight of who he really is.
Right, and that blurring of identity is amplified by the film setting a dystopian future where surveillance is everywhere. It's like everyone is watching everyone else, and privacy is practically non-existent.
Yeah, it creates this constant sense of paranoia and unease, like you're always being watched and judged.
It's almost like the scramble suit is a physical manifestation of that psychological state of living under constant surveillance. You're never really sure who's watching you, who knows your secrets, who's pulling the strings.
That's a really interesting interpretation. And it's kind of terrifying when you think about it.
It is, and it makes you wonder if we're heading down a similar path in our own world,
Yeah.
with all the technology and data collection and surveillance that's going on.
Right. It's like the film is a warning about what could happen if we're not careful.
Exactly. So, okay, we've talked about Philip K. Dick's influence, the effects of Substance D, the symbolic significance of the scramble suit. But there's another element of the film that I find absolutely mesmerizing, the animation style. They use this technique called rotoscoping, right? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, rotoscoping is so cool. Basically, it involves taking live action footage and tracing over it frame by frame to create animation.
Oh, wow. So it's like a hybrid of live action and animation.
Exactly. And it's a very labor-intensive process, but the results can be incredibly striking, as you can see in the scanner darkly.
Yeah, it's like watching a moving painting. The colors are so vibrant, and the lines have this fluidity and dreamlike quality that perfectly captures the character's altered states of consciousness.
Right. The rotoscoping technique isn't just an aesthetic choice. It serves a deeper purpose. It reflects the character's distorted perceptions, the blurred lines between reality and hallucination, and the overall sense of paranoia and uncertainty that permeates the film.
It's almost like the animation style itself is a character in the film, a silent but powerful force that shapes our understanding of the story.
I love that. That's such a great way to put it.
And it makes me wonder, was there a particular reason why the filmmakers chose rotoscoping over other animation styles?
Well, I think there are several reasons. First, as we've discussed, it perfectly reflects the character's altered states of consciousness and the film's overall themes of paranoia and blurred reality. Second, it creates this unique visual style that sets the film apart from other animated films. It's not your typical cartoon aesthetic. It's something altogether more unsettling and dreamlike.
Right, it's like a visual representation of the character's minds constantly shifting and fragmenting.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of the most memorable aspects of the film, the characters themselves. We've already touched on a few of them, like Charles Freck and Ernie Luckman, but I'm particularly interested in Donna Hawthorne. She's such a complex and enigmatic figure. What are your thoughts on her?
Donna is fascinating because she operates on multiple levels. On the surface, she seems like a typical love interest, a source of comfort and support for Arctor. But as the film unfolds, we discover that she's not who she appears to be.
Yeah, there's a whole other layer to her that's revealed later in the film, and it completely changes your perception of her.
Exactly. But we don't want to spoil the surprise for our listeners who haven't seen it yet. So instead, let's focus on her role in Arctor's life.
Yeah.
How does she influence his journey?
Donna plays a pivotal role in Arctor's downfall, but not in the way you might initially think. She's not just a femme fatale leading him astray. Her influence is much more subtle and insidious. She manipulates him, preys on his vulnerabilities, and ultimately contributes to his mental and emotional breakdown.
And the way she does it is so clever. She uses these subliminal suggestions, subtle hints, and a calculated distance that both attracts and repels Arctor. It's like she's playing a psychological game with him, and he's completely unaware of the rules.
Right, and that's what makes her character so chilling. She's a master manipulator operating in the shadows, pulling the strings, and orchestrating Arctor's demise without ever revealing her true intentions.
It's almost Shakespearean in its level of betrayal. And it raises some uncomfortable questions about the nature of trust, the masks we wear in relationships, and the potential for manipulation in a world where truth is often elusive.
And those questions become even more relevant when we consider the film's overarching theme of the surveillance state. In a world where everyone is watching everyone else, where privacy is a luxury few can afford, how can we ever truly know who to trust?
It's a chilling thought, and it makes me wonder if A Scanner Darkly is more than just a sci-fi thriller. Maybe it's a prophecy, a warning about the path we're heading down as a society.
It's certainly a cautionary tale, and whether or not it's prophetic remains to be seen, but it's undeniable that the film raises important questions about the role of technology in our lives, the erosion of privacy, and the potential for manipulation and control in a world that's becoming increasingly interconnected and surveilled.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
Maybe we should take a moment to catch our breath before we dive into the next layer of this mind-bending masterpiece.
Sounds good. I need a moment to think about all this anyway. So where were we? Oh yeah, we were talking about Donna Hawthorne and her role in all of this.
Right, and how she's not exactly who she seems to be.
Right. Well, before we get to that, I think we should talk about that scene where Arctor's watching the surveillance footage of himself.
Oh yeah, that scene is so trippy.
It really is. It's like the whole idea of fragmented identity just comes crashing down in that moment.
Yeah.
You know, Arctor's sitting there watching himself on screen, but he doesn't even recognize himself. It's like he's looking at a total stranger.
Right, and it's made even creakier by the fact that he's being watched while he's watching himself.
Hmm.
Like there are layers of surveillance going on.
Exactly. It's like this visual representation of the panopticon. That idea that you're always being watched even when you think you're alone.
And that's got to do a number on your psyche.
Yeah.
Makes you paranoid and distrustful.
Totally. It's like the film is saying that in a surveillance state, you can never truly be yourself. You're always performing for the cameras, even if you don't realize it.
So we've got Arctor spiraling deeper into addiction. His identity is like shattering into a million pieces, and he's being manipulated by Donna, who's got her own secrets.
Right. It's a recipe for disaster.
So where does the story go from here? How does it all unravel?
Well, as Arctor gets worse, he becomes fixated on these blue flowers that Donna has mentioned.
Oh yeah, the blue flowers.
Right? He sees them as this symbol of beauty and escape, a way to reconnect with something real in this world that feels increasingly fake.
But of course the irony is that those blue flowers are the source of substance D. He's chasing the very thing that's destroying him.
Exactly. It's tragic, Yeah. He's caught in this vicious cycle of addiction and manipulation, and he has no idea.
So what happens? Does he figure it out?
Well, that's where the big twist comes in. Remember how we were talking about Donna and how she's not who she seems?
Yeah, I've been waiting for this.
Well, it turns out that she's actually an undercover agent working for the organization that Arctor is trying to infiltrate.
Whoa, she's been playing him this whole time.
Yep. She's been feeding him subliminal messages, pushing him deeper into addiction, all to turn him into a better informant.
That's messed up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know she's trying to do her job, but sacrificing Arctor like that.
It's definitely morally ambiguous. The film doesn't shy away from that. It makes you question the ends justifying the means, Like how far is too far when it comes to fighting crime.
So what happens to Arctor in the end?
Well, it's kind of a bittersweet ending. He ends up finding a field of those blue flowers and brings them back to his friends, completely oblivious to the fact that he stumbled upon the source of the drug.
Wow, so his addiction actually ends up being the key to taking down the whole operation.
In a way, yeah. It's like even in his brokenness, he's still able to make a difference, even if he doesn't realize it.
That's kind of beautiful in a twisted sort of way.
It is. It's like the film is saying that even when everything seems lost, there's still hope, Even in the darkest of times, there's always a possibility for change, for something good to come out of the bad.
So it's not a happy ending, but it's not totally hopeless either.
Exactly. It's complex and thought-provoking, just like the rest of the film.
Okay, so we've talked about the ending, but there's one more big theme that we need to address, the surveillance state. It's like this omnipresent force in the film, creating this atmosphere of paranoia and unease.
Right, and it's not just a plot device. It reflects Philip K. Dick's own deep-seated fears about government monitoring. He was convinced that he was being watched and followed, and that paranoia really seeped into his writing.
And it's crazy how relevant that paranoia feels today. With all the talk about data collection and facial recognition technology and social media monitoring, it's like we're living in the world that Dick imagined.
I know, it's kind of freaky. The film shows how surveillance can erode our sense of privacy and freedom. It makes us second-guess ourselves and conform to the expectations of the system, even if it goes against our own instincts and desires.
So it's not just about Big Brother watching us.
Yeah.
It's about how surveillance changes our behavior, how it makes us less free, less ourselves.
Exactly. And that's the real danger of the surveillance state. It doesn't just monitor our actions, it shapes our thoughts and beliefs. It makes us question who we are and what we stand for.
So what can we do about it? I mean, is there any way to fight back against this kind of pervasive surveillance?
Well, that's a tough question. The film doesn't offer any easy answers, but I think it's urging us to be more aware of the ways in which we're being watched and monitored, to be more critical of the technologies we embrace and to fight for our right to privacy and autonomy.
So it's called to action.
In a way, yeah. It's like the film is saying, wake up, people. This is happening. Pay attention and don't let them take away your freedom.
That's a powerful message.
It is. And it's one that we need to hear now more than ever.
Okay, so we've talked about the surveillance state, but let's shift gears for a moment and talk about something a little more aesthetically pleasing, that amazing rotoscoping technique.
Oh, yeah, the animation in this film is just stunning.
It really is. It's like watching a moving painting. It's so fluid and dreamlike, and it perfectly captures the characters' altered states of consciousness.
Right, and I think the choice of rotoscoping was deliberate. It's not just a stylistic choice. It really helps to convey the film's themes of paranoia and blurred reality.
Oh, so?
Well, think about it. The rotoscoping gives everything this slightly distorted, otherworldly look. It's like the characters are seeing the world through a haze of drugs and paranoia. And the lines between reality and hallucination are constantly blurring.
That's a good point. It's like the animation style itself is a reflection of the characters' minds.
Exactly. And it creates this really unsettling atmosphere that just pulls you deeper into the film's world.
Yeah, it's like you're experiencing the drug trip right along with the characters.
And it's not a pleasant trip.
Definitely not. But it's a visually arresting one.
Absolutely. The rotoscoping gives the film this timeless quality too, Even though it was made back in 2006, it still feels fresh and relevant today.
Right. It's like a nightmare that could easily become reality.
Okay, so we've talked about the animation, but I think we need to circle back to the characters for a minute. Specifically, I want to talk about Charles Freck. He's such a tragic figure.
Yeah, he really embodies the devastating effects of substance D. He's constantly battling these imaginary bugs, and his descent into madness is just heartbreaking.
Right. And his suicide plan is both hilarious and horrifying.
Oh, yeah, the whole thing about framing Exxon for his death over a canceled gas card.
It's so absurd, and yet it also reveals the depths of his paranoia and delusion.
It's like a dark comedy routine gone wrong.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder how much of his behavior is caused by the drug and how much is just him.
Right. Like, is he inherently crazy, or did substance D just push him over the edge?
It's a question that the film leaves open.
Yeah.
And I think that's intentional. It makes us think about the nature of addiction and mental illness and how those two things can be so intertwined.
And then there's Ernie Luckman, who's like the poster child for paranoia.
Oh, yeah, he's a total mess. He's convinced that everyone's out to get him, and his behavior is just so erratic and unpredictable.
And his obsession with those pointless gadgets and contraptions.
Right, like that whole thing with the anti-gravity device. It's both funny and sad. You can see that he's desperate to find something to believe in, something to give his life meaning.
But his addiction just keeps pulling him further and further away from reality.
Exactly. It's like he's trapped in a prison of his own making.
So Charles Frick represents the physical and psychological toll of addiction. Ernie Luckman represents the paranoia and delusion. And then there's James Barris, who represents the manipulative side of addiction.
Oh, yeah. Barris is a real piece of work. He's always scheming and plotting and using people to get what he wants.
Right. And his addiction just fuels his manipulative tendencies.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the drug gives him this sense of power and control that he craves.
And he's not afraid to use that power to hurt the people around him.
No, he's a classic narcissist.
So we've got this whole spectrum of addiction on display in the film, from the physical deterioration of Charles Freck to the paranoia of Ernie Luckman to the manipulative tendencies of James Barris. It's like a cautionary tale about the many ways that addiction can destroy lives.
It is. And it's not just about drugs either.
Yeah.
The film suggests that addiction can take many forms. It could be addiction to technology, to power, to attention, to anything that promises to fill a void or numb the pain.
That's a really insightful point. It's like addiction is a symptom of a deeper societal problem.
Yeah.
A lack of connection, a loss of meaning, a sense of emptiness that we're all trying to fill.
Exactly. And the film doesn't offer any easy answers. It just presents this bleak but ultimately realistic view of the human condition. We're all flawed, we all make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes lead us down dark and dangerous paths. It's like we're living in that pre-crime world that Philip K. Dick wrote about in The Minority Report, where people are arrested for crimes they haven't even committed yet.
Right? It's like the film is saying that in a surveillance state, innocence is no longer a defense. You're guilty until proven innocent.
And even then, it's like, who are you going to appeal to? If the system is corrupt, if the data is being manipulated.
It's a pretty bleak outlook.
It is. But I think the film is also trying to offer a glimmer of hope. It's suggesting that even in the face of overwhelming power, there's always the possibility for resistance, for subversion, for finding ways to crack the system.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
No, not at all. I think the film is ultimately a call to action. It's urging us to be more aware of the ways in which we're being watched and controlled, to fight for our right to privacy and autonomy, to resist the seductive allure of conformity and obedience.
It's like a wake-up call.
Yeah.
A reminder that we need to be vigilant in defending our freedoms.
Exactly. Because once those freedoms are gone, they're not easy to get back.
One of the things that really struck me about A Scanner Darkly is how it captures the feeling of alienation and isolation that's so prevalent in modern society. Like, even though we're more connected than ever through technology, we often feel more alone than ever before.
Right. It's like that paradox of choice,
Yeah.
We have access to millions of people online, but we struggle to form meaningful connections in real life.
And I think it's part of what drives people to addiction. They're searching for something to fill that void, that emptiness, that sense of disconnection.
It's like they're trying to numb the pain of existence.
And Substance D in the film becomes this symbol for any kind of addiction, whether it's drugs or alcohol or technology, or even just the relentless pursuit of pleasure and distraction.
It's like we're all searching for something to make us feel whole, to make us feel connected, to make us feel alive.
But the irony is that those things often end up making us feel even more empty and alone.
Right, it's like a vicious cycle. The
Yeah.
more we try to escape the pain, the more we get trapped in it.
So what's the solution?
I don't know if there's a simple answer, but I think the film is suggesting that we need to find ways to connect with each other in more meaningful ways. To build real relationships, to find communities that support and nurture us, to rediscover the things that give our lives meaning and purpose.
That's a tall order.
It is. But I think it's worth striving for. If we want to break free from the cycle of addiction and alienation, we need to find ways to reconnect with ourselves and with each other.
So maybe A Scanner Darkly isn't just a warning about the dangers of technology and surveillance. Maybe it's also a call for a more human, more compassionate, more connected way of being.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it, and I think it's a message that we all need to hear.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into A Scanner Darkly.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
It has. But it's also been incredibly thought-provoking. This is one of those films that stays with you long after the credits roll. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world around you.
And it leaves you with a sense of unease, a feeling that the future is not set in stone, but rather a series of choices that we make every day.
So we invite you, our listener, to join us in this ongoing conversation. What are your thoughts on A Scanner Darkly that resonated with you the most? What questions did it raise for you about the future of technology privacy and the human condition?
Share your insights, your interpretations, your hopes, and your fears. Let's engage in a dialogue, a collective exploration of the challenges and possibilities that lie ahead.
Because in the end, it's through conversation, through shared stories and perspectives, that we can begin to understand ourselves and each other better, and perhaps find a way to navigate the complex and often unsettling terrain of the future.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you'll continue to explore, to question, and to engage in the conversations that matter most.